garden spacing for maximum yield. Let's talk about how to lay out your garden. A big factor is how much room you have. But then, what do you want to eat? And out of those plants, how do they actually grow? Let's take tomatoes as an example. Now, tomato is a vine. It grows fine on the ground. Everywhere it touches, it's going to root. But we can manipulate that a little bit, and we can squeeze a lot of tomatoes in a very small area just by trellising. This is a very simple method. You need to have some kind of a weight at the end of your string. You can either put a rock and bury it just a little bit in the soil. You can have a little stake. But you want to be able to push that in enough that this is going to be taut. And that would be right next to your tomato. Before we go too much further, let's go ahead and prune this up one more time. We've got a sucker right there, and this leaf is touching the ground. Remove it, and the sucker. Take that one off. And then, all we're gonna do is wind the tomato around the string. Knowing that the ground wants to stay covered also gives us some guidance about how close we can plant things together. And since I want to maximize my yield, I'm breaking with traditional convention. After doing a lot of research, I've come to the conclusion that modern spacing techniques are based off of wheel width off of a tractor. And yes, in a big field where it's all mechanized, that makes sense. But what we do know is the ground wants to stay covered. That's one of the principles behind the deep mulch that we're using. Now right here, I've moved a lot of leaves in. I got real lucky, I had quite a few in one area. But I'm sort of running out of leaves, so I'm gonna have to start bringing in the wood chips and the hay. We mix it all together. Point is, the ground wants to stay covered. Same thing with the plants. If you got an open spot, that's where you're gonna get weeds. Why not put something that's productive there? Out in the field, everything's shoulder to shoulder and they all grow just fine. So when we carve out this little postage stamp size area out of the whole earth and it doesn't perform the way we want it to and we get mad, that's because we're working against what nature wants to happen. If everything wants to stay covered, either in a mulch or in a living plant, let's use that to our advantage. So with the tomatoes, as an example, they're a vine. We can force them to grow up. They do just fine. The fruit progresses as they grow up. So those lower leaves, go ahead and clip those off, and that opens up, makes sun available in between those tomatoes. I plant the tomatoes 6 or 8 inches apart, sometimes closer. But in between, we go ahead and we put companions. Companions, what grows with basil? Did he say goes with basil or grows with basil? So when we're talking about companion planting, we're just talking about anything that goes or grows with other plants. And with tomatoes, we've got a large variety. Our marigolds do wonderful. And we seeded zinnias in just the other day and they're coming up. And I know most people think of dandelions as a weed. They're a really good companion plant for your tomatoes. Your carrots grow really well. The thing is, they take a while. The same with your beets. Has anybody ever said you can't have enough beets? But it's also a fun one to companion plant with your tomatoes. Now when you're companion planting with just about anything, you want to get stuff that goes well together on the plate as well as in the garden. And basil and tomatoes go really well together. There's a lot of herbs that you can also plant with your tomatoes. So anything that makes a really good combination on the plate usually makes a pretty good combination in the garden. And having a little cilantro next to your tomatoes doesn't hurt at all either. Another great companion is cucumbers. Peppers are another really nice companion for your tomatoes. And I've been experimenting with all kind of things. And you could put a lot of food in one really tiny little area. So what can you plant together to fill in those gaps? Everybody's list is a little different, and I don't think there's too many plants that really fight against each other. Yeah, if you can kind of move stuff around, but we've planted tomatoes in the same line for 4 years, and we're getting great production. The deep mulch, the life in the soil, that's what dictates how your plants grow. With my simple understanding about how the life in the soil interacts with the roots, the more roots, the more life. It all happens right there at the root zone. They all work together. So I don't think you can plant too many plants too close together. Sure, if you got a cabbage that's gonna get this big around, it needs a little space, but in between you can plant a root crop, say carrots or beets. You still wanna have that soil covered, and when you harvest that cabbage, now you got a big space that's empty. If you've got something already planted there, it'll take up that space as soon as the sun hits it. And we're using that same methodology right here. See, we've got carrots, cabbage, lettuce, more carrots. Got a cilantro down in here. Got more lettuce down in underneath here. And right in here, we've got a nice batch of beets, carrots, and cabbage all growing right together, and cilantro. They're all doing just fine, shoulder to shoulder. And right here, I've kind of planned out a walkway so we're not walking right on the plants. Not only do we companion plant and shove things as close together as we can, we succession plant. We planted these carrots early last year, and we're still thinning them out and eating on them. Then we came back and planted this row of carrots in between some corn that was here. Corn's been long gone, but we'll be eating on these right up to the spring planting. Does a couple things. One, it extends your harvest, but two, keeps living roots in the soil, which is needed by the life, which you're gonna need in the spring. Spring trellises work really good for your vine plants. Harder trellises work really good for, say, your beans, your asparagus beans, your pole beans, anything that will vine up and then get heavy. You want to have a substantial trellis. You'll be surprised at how heavy this stuff gets once it's full of water and is growing well. Now, it is a good idea to get your taller plants on the northern part of the garden, but if they come up on their own, flower where you root. We'll take volunteers every day. We'll take all the volunteers we can, whenever they can, wherever they grow. Just fine with me. And this okra is sad to see it go. It produced an awful lot of food for free. And here again, outside of convention, I'm just cutting and dropping. So I'm just gonna cut it off at the ground, leave those roots in for the life. Coming up in Grandpa's garden, nice straight rows. We had to have our spacing exactly right. It took me a very long time to come around to Ruth Stout's way of thinking. You just throw some seeds on the ground, make sure they have good soil contact, and go on to the house. If you look at it as a sheer numbers game, and you're gonna plant the same thing every 6 inches or 4 inches or what have you, what are the chances at some point through germination to harvest, you're gonna have some critter, some bug, take a good portion, if not all of that entire crop? Do that opposed to planting a bunch of different crops really close together, the way nature does it, your chances of having a decent harvest of something, if not all of it, goes way up. That's the way I look at it anyhow. Sweet potatoes is a great example of utilizing your room for a small space. That slip makes that hill, but all those vines that run out in all directions, everywhere they touch the ground, they're gonna make roots. Every one of those roots has a potential to make more potatoes. Now, if you want to save room, you're going to trellis those vines, just eat the vines, you're going to be limited on the amount of potatoes you're going to produce. So it all kind of depends on how much room you have and what your goal is. Cow peas or black-eyed peas are another one that does really well on a trellis. And you can also eat them in a couple different stages. When they're young, they just start getting the bean in there. You can eat those, the entire pod. We like to let them get a little more mature. Take the little black-eyed peas or beans out of the pods, let those dry, and that way we can carry on Grandma's New Year's Day tradition. Black-eyed peas and cornbread. Hope you join me for that. Now, if you want to learn more about the deep mulch, click that link right there and I'll meet you back in the garden. If you want to know my 4 crops for maximum yield, click that link right there and I'll meet you back in the garden. And until next time, remember, take care of yourself, take care of your family, and God bless you. Come on, let's plant.
Let's go plant garden.